Welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Hosler, licensed physical therapist and certified strength and mobility coach. Here you can expect to hear about all things movement. The Movement Upgraded podcast is a blend of the science of strength training, rehab, and mobility, mixed with the personal and professional experience to provide you with the steps you need to keep your body pain-free and moving well, so you can do what you love forever. Welcome back to the Movement Upgraded podcast. We've got Dr. Ryan back here on the podcast with us again. Say hi.
Hey, thanks for having me again. I'm excited for this. This should be good.
We're excited to have Ryan because I think Ryan adds a lot to the conversation. Everybody loves when Ryan joins, so it's this was back by popular demand.
Oh boy. Too kind.
So today we are going to chat about. I feel like I need a drum roll. We're going to talk about... You sound like Clark. Is it Clark from the Griswolds?
Yeah.
Family Vacation?
Christmas Vacation?
Yes. There we go with movies. Anyways, today we're going to talk about core stability. And this is kind of like one of those topics I don't love. I haven't shared a lot about it on Instagram because... I feel like
not very sexy.
It's not sexy, but also people love arguing about it and arguing about like who's right, who's wrong, that's wrong, and it's not very fun. So we're gonna have a good conversation about how we approach it. I'm not gonna tell you that we have everything figured out and this is all like, I don't know.
We're forever learning.
Yes, this is the answer, right? But like, I do want to give you some information of what we best understand about core stability up to now.
Yep.
That's kind of our point. So we're going to say it, we're just going to talk about everything according to that. So keep that in mind with a grain of salt. Like, everybody's going to be learning. We reserve the right to change our minds at any time. But so far in the past several years, I haven't changed my mind too much about this. I would say
we'll admit when we change our minds. We'll admit.
Yeah,
if you're changing your mind, you're learning, you're evolving.
Which is what I was going to say. I have changed my mind about core stability. What I used to understand and think about with core stability is not the way that I approach it and talk about it now. So if I change my mind again, then we'll have another podcast and we'll talk about it, and you guys get to be part of that. But I will always give you the best knowledge.
And we won't just delete the other stuff too. You can even
go back and look at my old Instagram posts if you are bored one Saturday and want to look at all the cringe. It's really fun. I love doing that. I actually really like looking at Ryan's old Facebook posts. Those are some of my favorites because he gets...
Oh my God.
It's so funny.
I'm like blushing right now just thinking about it. I just want to delete my Facebook so I don't get any of those memories. But I think that you would still get them.
I don't know. I hope so. I'm going to start saving them.
Oh my gosh.
This is what it's like to be married to me. Anyways, so like we said, we leave things up there because I think it's really important because we're human and that's like expected. And I think sometimes in the professional world, there's like this, you're not allowed to be wrong. You're not allowed to do wrong things. There's like this sense of like impossible perfectionism that we have to achieve. And I say that from my experience because I feel like that's kind of what school perpetuates. And I just am not a fan of it. So all of that, there's my little soapbox for that. All that to be said, let's talk about core stability and like what really is core stability?
Well, I would say, before I say what I think that it is, I would argue that the vast majority of what you see on social media and YouTube would argue that core stability is just core strength. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that? Mm-hmm. And then we would say that core stability is more about regulating and managing pressure within the core.
To provide strength, right?
To provide strength, yes. So what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, that's kind of complicated too. So let's kind of talk about like what I feel like we used to think of with core stability. Maybe that's a good place to start. So core stability back when I was younger, I used to just think it was like your abdominal strength. Mm-hmm. And the way that I thought of it was we need good abdominal strength to make sure that our spine doesn't move. And we want to withstand movement in the spine because we want to maintain a neutral spine always.
And I would say that's even more like forward thinking than the patients that come into our office.
Yeah.
They don't even think about that.
That's
they just
true.
think about strong abs, strong
Yeah,
obliques,
strong abs.
my little back is strong. Like, they just think about strength in general.
Yeah, and then when we ask them though, they won't really know how to define strength, but they just know that they need to work on abs, right? So they just are like, I need a lot of ab work because I need to make my back stronger. And ab work doesn't necessarily inherently make your back stronger.
Right.
Depending on how you're doing ab work, you may not be doing much for your spine at all, or you may be only moving in one part of your back, which is what we find a lot of people that come in to us struggle with, or that's like what we find with them. But back in the day, so I feel like the general consensus is we need some sort of ab work for core stability, right? Like core equals abs. And then if you're in the fitness world, you might understand core stability as I need to use my abs to make sure my spine doesn't move, because core stability is about not moving the spine, because we don't want to move the spine. We want to make sure our spine never moves at all costs, which is kind of bullshit because our spine moves. Like even the best trained like technique people with kettlebell swings, deadlift, squats, they have some spine movement. So there is really no such thing as a neutral, because the neutral is the point between two extremes. And if you start to only train spine in quote unquote neutral, then you start to lose those extremes, and now your neutral is your extreme. And that's actually creating more problems for you down the road. So
not to mention that your spine has joints for a reason, and joints are meant to move. So your spine's not always meant to stay in neutral. It's meant to move in all of those ranges of motion that the joints are able to move in.
Yeah, and like I say this all the time, but if you have a place where two bones come together and articulate, that's a fancy name for a joint. That's why cars have the A in it, the articulations. If you have two bones that articulate, the point of those articulations are movement. Otherwise, it would have been fused. If your spine was not supposed to move, then it would have been one giant long bone, like our femur is. Like our femur is not supposed to move. It's just a big bone. Anytime we have way too much movement, we have a fracture.
Yeah.
But like,
and these are just facts. Like you just can't argue that.
You can't argue that. So if we think about that, then like, what are we doing? And so the way that we keep joints healthy is through movement. Like people who move less have more joint issues. That is also a fact. Like that's something that we know for sure. So I always like to start with things that we know for sure that make a lot of sense, right? So when it comes to core stability,
we can't just say that it's about preventing movement at all times.
Yes. And for sure, we want to make sure we are reducing. Like if we are trying to do an exercise, that the goal is to load the hips. Yes, we don't want our spine doing a ton of extra work. We want our hips doing the movement, right? Like we can't argue that either. But that doesn't mean we have to be super afraid if the spine moves. And so it's really important to train your spine to move. That's why we do cars and spine segmentation, and we will even load the spine sometimes outside of that depending on the person. But we want to make sure that we can also withstand movement when we don't want it. So we want both. We just want control, right? I want control of things when I want control. So that means if I want to control hip movement, I want the hips to move. I don't want the spine to move. I want the muscles to be able to do that. When it comes to core stability, however, the goal isn't necessarily to withstand spine movement. It's to manage pressure inside of our abdomen, which is going to give our spines extra support and reduce the amount of compressive forces through the spine, which is really helpful. And it can improve our ability, like our general strength and ability to generate force overall, right? So we kind of talk about that idea of having a really strong canister, so that what's the analogy? That you can't shoot a cannon from a rowboat, because the rowboat is just going to go all over the place, so it's not going to go as far. You need like a solid foundation. So the ability to generate pressure is going to give you that solid foundation, and it's also going to decompress some of the spine when compressive forces are happening. So that is kind of how we like to think about core stability. Would you agree?
100%. Now, how do you create pressure in your core?
Yes.
I guess that's probably the biggest question.
Right. So that's kind of the next question. So
that might be the bulk of
everything.
the bulk of this podcast for sure.
Yeah. Well, it really comes from your breath and like owning your breath.
Yep.
And in more than just your breath, your diaphragm control. So the spiel that I usually give people that I work with is the way that I want you to think about core stability is a pressure system that starts with your diaphragm. So our diaphragm is this dome-shaped muscle that sits in our rib cage, and literally it cuts our body in half, like our upper from our lower body. So it sits there in like a nice, beautiful dome shape. So the like curve is pointing up to the ceiling, and as it contracts concentrically, it goes down. So as your diaphragm contracts, it pulls inferior. This is helpful because as we contract that diaphragm and contract it, pushing it concentrically,
and it moves inferiorly down
that
towards
is pulling air into our lungs. It's creating a negative pressure in the upper part of our abdomen, pulling our lungs down, getting air into them, right? So that's how we inhale. That is like how we perform an inhale, is our diaphragm concentrically contracting, getting air in. When that happens, though, there is something going on underneath on the bottom part of the diaphragm, which has been ignored for whatever reason, but we have seen this on like MRIs, is now that the diaphragm's pushing down, inferior, the pressure is increasing in that area because it's a closed system. So now we have pressure being pushed inferior. And when that happens, all of the other core muscles, they eccentrically contract. So they lengthen and contract. So we kind of have like everything kind of protrudes outwards, downwards, laterally, posteriorly, and then they contract. And depending on the intensity, we have a nice ball of rigid pressure that is a byproduct of the diaphragm coming down and all of those muscles eccentrically contracting, including your pelvic floor. So that is kind of how intra-abdominal pressure is created. So your diaphragm contracts concentrically, moves down all of the other muscles, which are going to be the typical core muscles that we talk about, which are your rectus abdominis, which is your six-pack muscles. We have our obliques on the side. We have our low back muscles, which are like our multifidi and erectors. And then we have our pelvic floor on the inferior side, like in your pelvis. And that is essentially just a mirrored version of your diaphragm. It's a bunch of muscles that are inverted diaphragm. So as your diaphragm contracts, those muscles actually lengthen and eccentrically contract and lower a little bit. And we don't talk about our pelvic floor muscles because they're this mythical, magical unicorn that we just don't want to talk about or don't understand, but they are part of your core. And if you have problems with them, AKA if you leak when you sneeze or cough or lift or jump, or you have some sort of like pain with sex or something along those lines, then we have a pressure management system typically. So we need to make sure we are talking about the pelvic floor and incorporating them. And then the last muscle is your transversus abdominis, which is kind of like your corset muscle that wraps all the way around. So I usually kind of explain that as the corset muscle. Everybody loves to isolate the TA, but your TA, again, is just part of the rest of the system. And a long time ago, I made a post about this saying that
we might have lost listeners already because we didn't talk about the TA already. And we didn't.
How dare we?
We talked about pressure and pushing out, and we haven't talked about drawing in yet. Oh, man.
I know, so we'll get there. But the TA is another part of the system. Every part of the system, except the diaphragm, will lengthen and eccentrically contract when we're creating pressure. So that includes the TA. So the TA is no longer going to contract, which is what we usually are cueing when we do a drawing in type of maneuver.
It's not going to contract concentrically.
Yes, it's not going to shorten is what I was saying. Right. So shorten means concentric contraction means we're shortening. It's actually going to lengthen, eccentrically contract, and that's a lot of the reason why we don't like the cue of drawing in and abdominal hollowing. So that cue might be effective if you want to really strengthen your TA to do the thing that your TA is really good at. And I bet you'll never guess what this is.
Well, do you want me to answer it? Because I know what it is.
You can answer it, yeah. So when the TA has the highest EMG reading, it is when it's concentrically contracting to...
vomit.
Yes, to vomit. This was actually one of the favorite things that I learned from Stu McGill's course. And Stu McGill doesn't teach a lot of this stuff, but he does teach some of it. It's just not all of it. So, but that was one of the things I loved.
The bulk of this information is what we got from DNS, Dynamic Neuromuscular Stabilization.
But he did talk about the TA and how drawing in actually decreases core stability. So you can now see, if you kind of understand all of what we just said, you can now see how it can decrease core stability, because now you're doing the opposite direction. So you're going to
decrease the pressure.
Yeah, you're going to decrease pressure, and decreasing pressure decreases core stability. That's like we know that. There's research now to actually support that you have decreased stability. So not only is drawing in not the best option, but it's actually going to do the opposite of what we're trying to get it to do. So you're better off doing like nothing, or just not thinking about it rather than drawing in. Drawing in is going to create problems down the road. So I will stop here for a minute and say, if you've done this in the past, you don't need to panic. And sometimes drawing in can change people's pain. It can make them feel better. I won't invalidate that at all. But what I do want everybody to understand about the drawing in and core stability is that we're talking about performance and strength. And if you're going to be lifting really heavy, you want higher amounts of intra-abdominal pressure to decrease compressive forces through the spine and to actually be able to generate enough force and to tap into your full strength, which means you need a good amount of intra-abdominal pressure, which means you need a good amount, a good ability to generate pressure and control it. And a drawing in of the TA is not going to help you. So if you have done this in the past, it's fine. We now can take this information and start to try something different. Like, it doesn't mean that you wasted your time. It doesn't mean the person who told you to is bad and terrible and dumb. They were probably giving you the best information they had at the time. And I do think that no clinician is doing anything to try to cause harm. I don't think that they're doing that. Now, if they have come across this information and been too attached to the emotional side of what they had been doing before, and they continue to perpetuate that idea, that's different, because they're being presented with information and given the opportunity to change their minds. And if they don't, maybe that's not ideal, but I don't think most clinicians are that way. I think they're just trying to do the best they can. And one of the reasons that the TA drawing in got so popular was because of an old study that came out in like the 80s, I think, showing that people with low back pain have lower EMG readings of TA in core contractions. So their TA doesn't contract as much, or it was weaker, I think.
I think it was delayed.
It was delayed?
Yeah.
Okay. So we had lower EMG recordings of the TA during movement in people with low back pain. So there was a correlation between those two things. And we know things about research is that correlation doesn't mean causation, meaning those things can be correlated, happening at the same time, but can be caused by something else. And we cannot draw causation from correlation. That's actually really dangerous to do. But we did. And so we thought, okay, well, if the TA is not doing something, well, maybe people with low back pain need to strengthen it. And when we think about strengthening in every other muscle, we just concentrically contract it. But that's not teaching the TA to function as it needs to for the stabilization process of creating core stability and getting intra-abdominal pressure created. And so that, I think, is where the biggest beginning of the TA drawing in type of idea started. And so this is like one of the biggest reasons why we don't do that.
Yeah. And I want to hop in here for like a little side note. If you are working on strengthening your TA, that's not necessarily bad, because maybe you need to do it within your sport. I'm thinking like bodybuilding. Like bodybuilding, they're posing, they want that, like the vacuum hollowing, like they want a real strong TA to be able to get and achieve the pose that they're searching for.
To shrink their
You're obviously you're going to need to train for that and build that strength and that control of the TA. Go for it. But you need to have these other options of what we're talking about to be able to create pressure and core stability in the other 98% of your life.
Yes.
And when you're lifting and moving and doing other things outside of your sport, you need all of the options.
And it's really important to note that also, like, I think one of the biggest issues is that we take something like low back pain and we think we need core stability. And low back pain in general, like even pulling back from low back pain, is complex and nuanced. And we really have to understand that, like, you know this because of my podcast in the past. Pain has so many other factors that we can't just be like, yeah, you need core stability. We might need a little bit of intra-abdominal pressure management for sure. I definitely always assess that with people with low back issues. We look at their breathing strategies and things like that. But I'm also going to look at their spine. What does your spine do? I'm also going to look at their hips. Is your spine doing too much work for your hips? I'm going to look at your shoulders, because a lot of times our spine's doing the work for our shoulders too. Like, back pain's complicated, and we can't just take a core stability thing to like, it's literally like taking duct tape.
It's not the solution for everything.
It's like taking duct tape and just like putting it over like some hole in your, I don't know, giant boat, like the Titanic. Like, it's just, like, what are you doing? Like, you're fixing a little hole, but like the Titanic hit the iceberg and like it's going down, so not that pain is making you go down. That's probably like a really bad analogy.
We understood.
We can't all have great analogies all the time, but it's just not ideal for addressing pain alone. So just know that we're not perpetuating that idea at all. You're not super fragile, and your spine's not super fragile that like if you don't have intra-abdominal pressure, you're just going to become paralyzed and fall apart. That's also not true, and you're not guaranteed to have pain either if you can't pressurize well. But it probably will affect your performance and your strength. I think that could be, I don't want to say guaranteed because nothing's guaranteed, but I think it's pretty accurate to say you will not have the same amount of strength if you're not creating and managing your pressure well.
Yeah, and I think that if you just ask some of the most elite athletes out there, how do you create core stability? They're going to tell you that it's through creating this type of pressure system.
I mean, look at the strongest people in the world, like the power lifters, right? They're moving the most mass, like the most amount of force. And what do? They have these giant belts around their midsection, not because the belts are really doing a ton. They do generate like a slight amount of stiffness, but it's because they're pushing out into the belts.
Yeah, they're creating pressure into the belt.
Yes, we are lengthening those muscles and kind of pushing out, which is eccentrically contracting the muscles when we concentrically contract the diaphragm. So that's how all of those core muscles work together to create pressure. And it's pretty cool when it works like that. Mm-hmm. And if you learn how to do that, it can be pretty game-changing for a lot of things, including like if you just have a little bit of low back stiffness when you're doing, or like tightness or pain or discomfort when you're really loading your back with a lot of weight, learning how to pressurize and learning how to control that and make sure we can use our diaphragm for breathing and pressurizing, and making sure we can pressurize in every direction can substantially reduce that. Not always, right? Because it's complicated, but for a lot of people that we work with, it's definitely been that way. So
do we need to break that down, or do we want to break that down in this episode?
Break down what?
Like, are you able to breathe? Like, kind of our assessment of how we assess core stability?
Yeah, so one last thing I want to say, and then we'll kind of talk about it. But the one thing I wanted to say is that once you learn how to create intra-abdominal pressure, and you can do that directionally, which we'll break down a little bit here, but once you can do that, every exercise becomes a core exercise. Mm-hmm. Like anything you're doing, it's making sure you're pressurizing. And depending on the position you're in and what you're doing, you may not be able to pressurize maximally or optimally in every single direction because it's going to be dependent on the task. But like you now are utilizing that or can utilize that in every task. And then the other thing I wanted to note is the common thing I hear when I say intra-abdominal pressure is the Valsalva maneuver. And people kind of being like, wait, if I do that, I'm going to like, that's, I want to avoid the Valsalva maneuver. And if you're talking about core, I need to think about avoiding that, especially if I'm pregnant or something, because like I'm supposed to be avoiding the Valsalva maneuver. And I just want you to understand that creating intra-abdominal pressure is not like synonymous with Valsalva maneuver. Intra-abdominal pressure is a spectrum of like intensity and amount that we're doing. So if we think about a muscle contraction, if I'm going to pick up a shoe off the ground and like bicep curl it, right? My bicep curl is going to, or my biceps are going to contract a little bit. If I try to pick up a 50-pound dumbbell off the ground and bicep curl it, one, I'm not going to be successful because I'm not that strong. Maybe one day. But two, I'm going to be generating a ton more of a contraction from my biceps. So the amount of force that we generate or the strength that we need for the task is dependent upon the task. Same thing with intra-abdominal pressure. If I'm going to move my arm over my head, my diaphragm actually is going to descend just a little to create just a little bit of stability. We've seen that in MRIs, actually.
Yeah, that's actually cool. Really cool.
Functional MRI, they looked at people laying in the MRI machine, and they tracked their breathing, and they had them stop breathing. Then they had them lift their arm, and they were not using their diaphragm to breathe because they stopped breathing. But when they lifted their arm, their diaphragm concentrically contracted and pulled down just a little bit, which shows us that we do use this diaphragm for this mechanism. Like exactly what's happening because you're not using your diaphragm for breathing. So there's only two things you really use your diaphragm for. And that was pretty fascinating. So when we are doing that and we're just moving our arm, we're not going to use a ton of intra-abdominal pressure. But if I'm going to go PR my like deadlift, I am going to use as much intra-abdominal pressure as possible. That's going to be more of a max lift.
That's
and
more of that Valsalva.
That might be more a Valsalva maneuver. And the reason that happens is because our diaphragm does two things. It's got a respiratory function and it's got a stability or a pressure function. And I want to, in general, be able to use it for both. But if I'm using it maximally for one of those areas, I'm not going to be able to use it for the other. So when you are doing EPR, you're maximally using your diaphragm for stability and pressure in your core. So you are no longer going to be able to use it to breathe. So now we have the closed glottis, we are not breathing, and you will Valsalva, and you need to Valsalva to create that amount of force that you need. Now, when we don't have the ability to regulate our blood pressure very well, that can lead to those people passing out, which you see the videos of all over on social media. But it's not all a Valsalva maneuver, only at a max.
The spectrum.
And then the reverse is interesting too. When we are using our diaphragm maximally for things like running, we are not going to be able to use it for stabilizing, which is really interesting. And then we kind of get into that CrossFit talk where we're combining those two things and we're starting to use that diaphragm to get air in and out of our lungs. We can't use it to stabilize very well. And we see a lot of the breakdown of form and things like that in super heavy lifts when we are combining those things in CrossFit. And sometimes I think...
and you can do both, but a lot of times it's too much too soon or too quick. And you have to train to be able to do both of those things. Your body will adapt. It's
but also it's just like, think about it. Like, if you're doing
working at the end of a spectrum type of thing.
If you were using your diaphragm for your respiration because you just ran as hard as you could, or you're pushing as hard as you can, it's probably a good idea to not also load up your power cleans or squats or whatever you're pairing with your WOD that day to your max lift, because you're not going to be able to. You shouldn't expect your body to PR when you're trying to perform metabolic conditioning. So that's kind of my little gist of that. Like, your diaphragm can do both, should do both. When we're at one end of the spectrum for either of them, you're going to have the ability to use it less for the other.
I like that. That was a good clarification.
Yes, thank you. And that kind of brings me into if you are worried about Valsalva maneuver type stuff for pregnancy, which is where I see the other argument against this type of pressure and intra-abdominal pressure. And they're like, well, maybe that's fine for... I don't know, like quote unquote normal people, like pregnant women are not normal.
They're so different.
we'll just skip the tangent about that. But what about pregnant women? Because they have to be more careful because now they have a baby. Well, I first want to say, we really need to stop operating off of this idea that women are fragile. Women are not fragile. Women are not fragile when they're on a certain time in their periods. They're not fragile when they're pregnant. We're not fragile. And the fact that women can just carry these babies with all this extra weight on them and do all of their daily activities, we really need to stop thinking that they're fragile. We can be more cautious about things for sure, but they're not fragile. And so with that being said, intra-abdominal pressure still applies to women. And I think there's a lot of fear mongering about that, where they're like, oh, well, now core matters more. And it does. Intra-abdominal pressure probably matters more. But you need to make sure that you're doing it directionally. And if we are having too much pressure forwards, maybe we have an increased risk of the diastasis recti. If we are lifting to our max loads and we don't have a good regulation of our blood pressure, then maybe we're doing a Valsalva and we should avoid that. But that doesn't mean we should avoid and just discontinue the physiology of how our body works. It just means we need to modify it according to the person in front of us and not be so conservative that we're actually doing them harm in the long run. So women shouldn't necessarily avoid lifting because they have to avoid creating pressure because it's dangerous. We need to just make sure we are not pushing them to their max so they are having to hold their breath and creating a Valsalva when they're doing a lift. And that all starts from making sure that they can create and generate core stability and pressure in every direction. So with that being said, there's my tangents. I wanted to make sure we got those in.
These are good tangents, though.
Yeah, thanks.
So everything that we're going to build upon, I want to first preface that I think that the majority of people skip all of the stuff that we are going to talk about in the next half of this podcast, and they just do the exercises that they see. So Jen mentioned earlier that once you have core stability and your pressure regulation system figured out, anything is a core exercise. But most people skip all of the foundational stuff and they just do the exercises and they say, well, I'm working my core with these exercises. But what you're going to find out is maybe you weren't optimally creating pressure and core stability in the first place, and you need to create a good solid foundation utilizing some of the stuff that we're talking about and then implement it into the exercises. Don't just skip to the sexy stuff.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people think are core exercises are really spine control exercises too. Like going back to that, like yeah, it's a core exercise if you're working on intra-abdominal pressure, but if you're doing a suitcase carry where you're trying to make sure that you're maintaining your upright position against gravity, you're loading the opposite side like QL and things like that. So you're trying to prevent lateral side bending. So you're really just loading the spine muscles to prevent lateral side bending. You're not necessarily working on generating core stability or intra-abdominal pressure, which if you are working on that or you do incorporate that, then yes, that's more of a core exercise. But most core exercises that people will think of are the
muscles and not the pressure stuff.
And it's more spine control. So that being said, I think, one of the things that I think I didn't mention that I also think people think is core stability all the time, putting people on like a Bosu ball.
Oh.
Like all of a sudden, if I change people's balance.
I'm so far removed from that I just like forget it.
Same, but like I see something. Like I go on my Explore tab to remind me of what the real world is because I'm so small in my world now. So I just wanted to note that like that's not core stability, and just all of a sudden doing unilateral training becomes core stability too, which I feel like I wish we would just say like spine control because it's really what it is. And to me, core stability really just needs to be like pressure management. And if we're not talking about pressure management and breath control, it's not core stability. And I know that's semantics, but I think it would be less confusing for the general population. And we could come to a little bit better of a consensus if we all agreed on those things. So that is just a side note.
Yeah, it's a good side note.
But a lot of people they just skip all of the basics. And even when people come into my office, or even when I've talked to people on social media before, they'll be like, well, what do I need to think about when, how do I need to brace when I'm squatting? This is like the newest thing that I keep seeing. And I think we can talk about that, right? Like we could talk about what we want to think about, but 90% of the time plus, we don't need to be thinking about bracing when we're squatting. Let me backtrack. We do need to think about that, but we need to start figuring out, do I have control of my diaphragm, and can I coordinate that with the other core muscles to generate intra-abdominal pressure in an easier position without load? We think about strength in general, if we kind of pull back to any exercise. If I can't do an exercise with a small amount of load, adding load is not going to make me better at it. I'll say that again.
I was just going to say
If I cannot do an exercise without load or with a small amount of load, adding more load is not going to magically make me better at it. There is no magic. You are not going to gain strength just by adding load. You have to know. You have to you have to generate strength. Like you have to build that strength. You have to build the awareness. So when it comes to our diaphragm, a lot of people don't have the strength or control to pull their diaphragm down, contract their diaphragm down all of the way through its full range of motion. We kind of live in a world where we shallow breathe a lot and we don't do a lot of slow, deep, expansive inhales and then like relax exhales, or we don't even really do full exhales either. And so because of that, our diaphragm really just contracts in
a shortened range of motion.
Very small amount of range of motion. And just like every other joint, like we lose the control if we don't work on it.
Yep.
And if I can't really do that on my back in a really low level position where I'm not having to use any of my core muscles to maintain my position against gravity, then I'm not necessarily going to be super great at it in a squat, and I'm definitely not going to be able to do it with a bunch of weight on my back. So I understand that we can talk about how to brace and how to think about that with squatting, but I just say let's go back to learning, do you have control of your breath? So that's where we start with people. We have them on their backs in a very comfortable position, and I just see like, what's your normal breathing pattern like? And there is arguments on whether or not we can talk about you're breathing wrong or right, and that's not what I usually tell people. I just say you are using a lot of accessory muscles to breathe just laying here on your back.
What are accessory muscles? Let's clarify that.
Yeah, so when I have people on their backs and we're looking at things, I'm really just like, I'm usually assessing them before they even know that I'm assessing them. So I'm sitting there and I'm telling them, let's find a relaxed position, just get a couple breaths in and kind of relax before we start the core assessment, right? I don't even tell them I'm looking at their breathing. If you do, they'll change it. And I look, okay, so if your laying on your back, you should be doing a relaxed breathing. So we have different breathing patterns that we get into based off of which nervous system activity is kind of dominating. So we have two different dominating nervous systems. We have like our parasympathetic and we have our sympathetic. You've heard me talk about this at length's end, especially in
I think the stress and pain
because I talk about breathing there. And this is how your breathing actually relates to core stability. So we're kind of linking it all together. So
Came full circle.
I know. Parasympathetic is like your rest and digest and recovery or repair mode. That is when we are just chill, right? That's like how we should be all the time, except when we are doing something that is challenging our sympathetic nervous system. I almost said majority of the time, but Ryan makes fun of me for how much I say that, so I'm changing my life.
I wasn't even going to call her out if she said it this time. She caught herself. I ruined her.
When people do that, it just like, now I have this thing in my head and it's just, I can't, it's like, it's a pain in my ears to hear it. Anyways, where was I? Side note.
We were talking about accessory muscles and stress
versus
pain.
your sympathetic nervous system, right? Which is your fight or flight mode, fight, flight, or something. Somebody else's. I don't know. I feel like there's another word that people have added to it. It just is the type of it's the nervous system activity that gets you ready to run away from something or fight something that would potentially kill you or eat you, right? That's not really happening very often in our lives, but that system is primal. So like it originated, we've adapted to have that nervous system to make all these changes in our bodies to get us ready for those things. So we have an increased respiration rate. We start to breathe with our shoulders coming up to our ears. Our pupils constrict. I said this wrong last
dilate.
time.
Don't they dilate?
I said it wrong last time. I thought they constricted. And we start to sweat more. Our blood goes to our muscles. Like we have all these responses that happen in our bodies to get us ready to run or fight something that is trying to kill us or eat us, right? It's survival mode, essentially. We're activating this system when we exercise, but this is also very often a response to, it's like a tension response or a response that happens when we feel stressed. So if you have somebody yelling at you, if you have some sort of trigger that's happening because somebody said something that like really angered you, or you got cut off in the car, like any little thing can stimulate that, even a low amount where you're not even aware of it. And so now our muscles are tense, all of those things are happening. And we usually don't have that awareness, so we don't really know how to downregulate and bring ourselves back to parasympathetic mode. The reason that I'm bringing this up is because the breathing patterns change. So I told you your shoulders come up to your ears. We start to breathe with our neck muscles to get air in faster. Our breaths become very quick and shallow, and our chest kind of lifts up. So we're really just trying to get that air in very quickly, which is helpful so that we can run away very fast. When we're in parasympathetic mode, our breath should be very slow, a little bit more deep and expansive, and very relaxed and quiet. Our mouth should be closed. We should be able to breathe in through our nose. Our diaphragm should contract down. We should feel some expansion in our bellies and our sides, maybe in our backs, and a little bit in our chest and our upper back too, depending on how deep of a breath you're doing. But what we should not see or feel is all of these neck accessory muscles working to get air in faster. Most people, because we don't have the awareness of when we're in more sympathetic versus parasympathetic activity, live in that sympathetic type of breathing pattern. And changing your breathing can automatically bring you more into a parasympathetic. It's like a vicious cycle. So breathing more sympathetic actually facilitates that cycle. Breathing a little bit more parasympathetic really downregulates that cycle and completely changes and shifts us over to more of a parasympathetic state, which is why breath work is so powerful. Now, one of the reasons this can become problematic for people with intra-abdominal pressure is that because we're living in that shallow breath and we're using our neck muscles, well, one, our neck and our back, because sometimes we will start to use our back to lift our chest, to give our diaphragms a little bit more room to pull down. Those areas can become a little tense because they're not equipped to do that many repetitions of 20 to 30,000 times a day.
That's not what they were designed to do.
Yeah, they're just not prepared for it. So we just need to kind of focus on paying attention to a little bit more of that parasympathetic breath, a little bit more expansive, a little slower, and a little bit more deep. And it doesn't mean you need to have this perfect breath 24/7. It just means any awareness you bring to your breathing can facilitate quite a big change. That's all I want usually when I'm working with people. So when I'm first assessing them, they're on their backs. That's what I'm looking at. Like, are their neck muscles tight? Like, you can see neck muscles contracting as they're doing their breath. Do I see their chest like lifting up to their face and their shoulders coming up to their ears when they breath? Do they sigh? Or is their mouth open a lot? Are they mouth breathing? Do I see any rib cage movement or abdominal movement when they're breathing? If I don't, they're probably not breathing very deeply and they're breathing very shallow. And so usually I'll give people a couple breaths to relax because they just met me. They're not super comfortable. They're on their backs. Their eyes are closed. Depending on who they are and their history, they may not have super great trust in somebody right there. And so we usually work on that. And sometimes people will come back into more of a calm breathing pattern, but most people will not because that's just the lives that we live. And so that's the first thing that we look at, right? Just like, what is their normal breathing pattern? We'll talk to them a little bit about it, but then we go into the assessment. What can your diaphragm do? What's the control of your diaphragm and what strength is it essentially? Like, can you breathe into all the areas? Can you get your diaphragm to contract concentrically into each direction? So usually the first thing is like, can I get a breath down away out of my ears? Or can I get them to breathe away from their ears? So can we get an inhale without neck muscles contracting? For a lot of people, that's hard. And sometimes that's the first thing they work on. I don't even assess more.
And sometimes you can spend a whole hour session on just
getting
trying to get people to breathe out of their chest.
Yeah. And sometimes I have to get them to go on their stomachs. And it's like almost like their brain just doesn't want to let go. And that's kind of going back into, all right, we have some difficulty relaxing. But this is one of the ways that people can. I was never like a meditative type of person. It was really hard for me. But getting a little more physical and focusing on my breathing was one of the ways that I was able to really begin doing that. And so also another reason why I'm so adamant about it, for a lot of my patients, meditative stuff doesn't work for them. They're just not, it's the amount of effort required before you get any return on investment for your effort is so significant that they can't get past it. And so they're never consistent with it. And so this is usually a habit that's a little bit more tangible for them. And then it's a habit that once you're already working on your breath work, you can now start to implement more meditative stuff. So that is going to be where we start. And from there, our assessment's just going to be, okay, like once we did that, can you get your breath into every direction? So I already kind of talked about this, but we want to make sure that you can pressurize into your abdomen, so forwards. We want to make sure you can pressurize inferior into your pelvic floor. We do not do any internal work there, but we do find like the pubic bone right above that. It's like the top of your pelvic floor. It's a really good indicator on if you can get your pelvic floor to join the party or not, right? Based off of how low you can get your diaphragm. Then we look laterally in between the ribs and hips, so we go sideways. So I'm like, can you breathe east to west? That's actually really hard for most people. They're like, what are you talking about?
Breathing east to west and breathing into the back, which is the next area. Those are almost impossible for a lot of people, especially if they have like chronic lower back stuff.
Yeah, and depending on the position too, which we talked about a little bit. So if you have like a significant amount of like rib flare and you're in a lot of anterior pelvic tilt, which just means if you're low back, like there's a big distance between your low back and the ground, we may need to work on some repositioning to get you now to feel your ability to pressurize or breathe into your low back, which can help decompress some of the tightness that's there, and actually get you to be able to use pressurizing to relieve some of the compression, because our brains will find a way to create some source of stability when we cannot pressurize, and a lot of time it's extending and compressing the joints in the back together, which is also trying to lift our rib cage to get our diaphragm to contract a little bit more. But sometimes we have to work on just like repositioning a little bit for some people, which just means getting their legs elevated, maybe going in a different position, but we always will make sure, like, can you get breath in every direction? That's number one, right? So that's the first part or the first function of the diaphragm. Number two is going to be, can you pressurize in every single area? And we do this independent of the breath. So I want you to make sure that you can do both functions of the diaphragm independently, and then we put them together and we see if you can coordinate. Now, these are not like the only ways to assess something. It's just something that we put a system together that makes sense based off of the things we're talking about.
And it works with our patients.
Yeah, it works really well.
Easy.
So it's not the end all be all. I just want to remind people that, because I just feel like it's really important. But that's going to be the next thing. So the way that we assess pressure is we have them do a regular inhale, and on their regular exhale, they just hold their breath. So we have them exhale, hold their breath, and then we have them push out in all of those areas. So I'll put my fingers on the different areas we just assessed their ability to breathe into, and now can you push out into those areas? So what's happening there is now we're using our diaphragm to create pressure independently. So are we able to do that? And then are those muscles able to eccentrically lengthen? And that's kind of what we're looking there. So are we able to coordinate the diaphragm with those muscles in that area? So diaphragm concentrically contracts, and those muscles eccentrically contract in that direction. So can you do that in the belly, in the area by your belly button, inside of your hip bones, down by your pelvic floor above your pubic bone, laterally in between your hips and ribs and into your back? Can you do that? Now, I just want to tell you, if you're practicing this while you're listening to us, you do take breaths in between. So we don't have them hold their breath for 5 minutes as we're assessing all of these. We do 1 to 2 times, and I will have them exhale, and then I will have them push out, relax, and push out again. So that's just kind of going a little bit deeper, but sometimes I'll have them do that just to see, can you relax and then do it again? So can you control the diaphragm eccentrically and concentrically again? And a lot of people that I work with have a really hard time with relaxing. And if you can't relax a muscle, then the next time you try to use it to generate force, you're going to have a reduced amount of force that comes from that muscle. So we always want to make sure you can relax a muscle and contract it. Same thing with intra-abdominal pressure.
And a lot of people, when you're assessing the stability function of the diaphragm, they want to use their breath.
Yes. And so this is a hard thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, they need to learn how to not use that breath and just use that diaphragm to contract concentrically to create that pressure in the area.
Yes. So then we look at that, and maybe that's the next thing people work on. And then the last thing we look at is, can they coordinate all of it? So as you inhale, can you create pressure into all those areas? Can you maintain that pressure as you exhale a certain amount and then inhale again? And can we just maintain the pressure without losing that pressure while we're using the diaphragm to also breathe, right? Get air in and out of our lungs. So that's really kind of what we do. And we always will start in the easiest position, and then we progress from there. So maybe we try to add movement. Can you do that while you're moving an arm or a leg, or both legs or arms? So dead bugs are a really common core exercise, but if you're not actually generating intra-abdominal pressure, you're just moving your legs.
Maybe you can hear the dog in the background. He's
reached his limit.
You are done with this podcast.
Yeah, he's reached his limit. He's tired of core stability. He's like, why do you have to teach people to breathe? I do it so well all the time. Yeah. So
he's the perfect belly breather.
I know. He's so noisy. Anyways, so dead bugs are one of those really popular exercises, I think, perpetuated for low back pain a lot. They're like, oh, core stability, let's do dead bugs. You know what's interesting about dead bugs is the amount of people that try to do them and don't have hip extension, and they actually are just as they start to lower their leg down, they don't have hip extension control or range of motion. They're just putting themselves into hip extension, and I've worked with people that have done this, and they're like, oh, they hurt my back, or they don't feel super great. And it's just kind of goes back to that whole idea of, let's make sure we assess people and give them exercises based off of what their assessment shows, and not just pick these random exercises that we think are good for pain, and really kind of address their actual deficits and limitations, and don't perpetuate others or something along those lines. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyways, going back to dead bugs, those are, not a bad exercise, but let's make sure you're doing some intra-abdominal pressure with it, so that when you're lowering your leg and switching and alternating your legs, you're maintaining pressure. And I swear to you, dead bugs will never have felt so hard for you until you work on them in this way. And that might be one thing, and then progressing, right? So can you do it? Can you coordinate pressure and breathing in quadruped, or a low bear position, or a squat position, or any position? It's going to be position specific.
But don't be surprised that if you can't do it on your back, that you're just magically going to be able to skip 10 different steps or more and do it in a squat.
Yes, that's the key, right? So it's just like everything. There's steps that you need to make sure
you have to
that
slowly
you're doing.
Regress to
progress.
Yep.
Take a couple steps back. I have to do that often, and the universe will constantly remind me that I didn't do it enough, and that I try to do it sometimes here and there, and I'm like,
we all have
I
setbacks.
knew better than that, which is annoying, but keeps me human, keeps me humble. It's the way it is. So that is kind of, I think, the majority of Shit, did it again. That is the core stability concepts that we really go through with the people that we work with. And there's obviously like little tips and tricks and nuances that are involved beyond what we just said, but that is the core of what we do.
Ooh, I see what you did there.
See, this is also why it pays to have Ryan on the podcast.
Little puns.
I make my little puns and like somebody actually laughs instead of myself just laughing at my jokes, which I've been doing my whole life anyway, so it's not that big of a difference, but it's always nice to have a hype man. Ryan's like the best hype man ever, so.
I try.
Yeah. So anything else you wanted to add about core stability that I missed that we didn't chat about?
I think we covered it all.
I know, I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff that I'm thinking of just comes back to like a lot of the education that we give just to help people understand the stuff more.
Yeah, and make sure
a lot
that
of analogies and stuff like that.
And to make sure that like, and there's other little tools, like using a balloon is a great tool. It's like the fanciest respiratory training device you'll ever have, but it gives you some feedback depending on how you're doing it as to whether or not you're actually maintaining pressure, because you should be able to blow up the balloon, not close off the balloon while there's air into it. And like, you blow up the balloon with your like, while creating pressure, right, to overcome the pressure of the balloon. So you put air into the balloon and you maintain the pressure in your abdomen, and you have to do that to keep the balloon blown up as you take an inhale. If you inhale and you lose that ability to keep pressure, the balloon will blow back up in your face. Most people will try to use their fingers to like pinch the balloon off, or their tongue, but you should be using your pressure. And so like these little tools are sometimes things that we do, but sometimes they get people more confused than not. So we really try not to do that, because the goal isn't to overcomplicate anything.
But coming back to like the basics of core stability, I think one of the best analogies to look at, and maybe you like this one, maybe you don't, I don't know, is just looking at a car tire, because this tells you that core stability isn't just about strength, and it's not just about pressure.
I forgot about this
and
one.
Yeah, it's an analogy that I love, and I love using it with people, because again, most people think that, or at least people that come into our office that are in pain, they think core stability is just about strength. And if you think about a car tire, you're thinking like that rubber tire itself as like your abdominal wall, your obliques, your pelvic floor, your diaphragm, all the muscles that you think you would typically need to strengthen. If you have a thick rubber car tire, or the muscles,
that's beneficial.
It's
helpful.
It's definitely beneficial, because you'll be able to withstand more pressure
and more things on the road, right?
Yeah, exactly. But if you don't fill that car tire up with air, or you don't create core stability through creating pressure in your abdomen, you're driving on a flat tire essentially. Yep. So you need both. It's not strength or pressure. It's not pressure or strength. You need both.
And when he says strength too, he's not just meaning like you can do an abs sit up with 45-pound weight plate. He's talking about like tissue thickness.
Yeah.
And tissue thickness is like, it's hypertrophy of the muscles, but also the fascia, the ligaments, like all the white stuff, right? Like we think of muscles as like the red stuff, and it's both. We need both. And so that's why the spine control exercises where you're working on maybe ab work or controlling your spine, those are important because that's important obviously to keep your spine healthy and to build strength of the tissues, improve the tissue capacity. And also we need the pressure, like Ryan said. And so I love that analogy of thinking about things from the perspective of a car tire. It's not going to do you any good if that tire has no air in it, and it's all about pressure. That's how our tires work. So I think that was a great way to end it. So, and I think maybe
going back to the car tire thing, like you could have less air in your tire and it's not going to be as optimal for driving. But if you really want to increase your performance and you're working on some of this core stability and pressurization stuff, you'll be able to lift more because you have more stability and more pressure.
Yep.
It's more optimal for that car to drive on a tire that has the right amount of air.
Also, side note to all of that too, if we're thinking about like something like a T8 strength, right? You're still going to get strength from eccentric loads.
Oh,
so
facts.
I think that was something I forgot to mention, but same with the pelvic floor. This is something that is interesting to me about pelvic floor, like rehab and things like that. We are obsessed with Kegels, and Kegels are kind of another example of the TA. Kegels are a concentric contraction of the pelvic floor, so drawing that pelvic floor up, which can be actually more problematic for some people, or just can do absolutely nothing for others because you're just making those muscles a little thick. And it might be helpful, right? Like There might be times when you need to do it, but when we're talking about like your ability to make sure that you're not leaking or like peeing yourself when you're lifting weight, that is a pressure management problem. And that is like when you're working on core stability, you're learning how to eccentrically contract the pelvic floor, which is really like ultimate strengthening. If we think about strength training in general, heavy or loaded like eccentrics are some of the best ways to really generate a ton of strength, because you're now able to add a lot more load than you ever would to tissues in a concentric contraction, because all you're doing is slowing the the weights lowering down to like gravity or whatever. You're just controlling the weight instead of having to move it against gravity. So when you are doing core stability type of work, eccentric training is also still training those really deep core muscles. So you're still strength training your transversus abdominis and your pelvic floor when you do those things. And depending on how intense or how much of intra-abdominal pressure you're creating and how much weight you're lifting when you're doing it or what you're doing, you're going to get a little bit different types of adaptations, but you're still working on those, and you're going to then generate a little bit more thickness of those muscles in the sense that we were talking about earlier. So you're actually working on the ability to manage pressure, and you're also working a little bit on strength training for those muscles. It's a little bit of both and when we're doing those things. So I just want you to know that if you have been told or feel like your TA is weak and all you've been doing is concentric exercise, you're not just completely abandoning TA strengthening, you're still doing it when you are doing intra-abdominal pressure and breath work, because we're eccentrically contracting.
Yep.
So the last thing that I wanted to note is that one more time, if you do not have this ability, it doesn't mean you are weak and frail and your spine is going to crumble, right? Like our spines can withstand a lot of load. They just typically feel better when they have a little bit more assistance from things like intra-abdominal pressure. So do not leave this podcast thinking that your breath sucks, you have to fix your breathing, and that your spine is fragile and weak if you can't pressurize, because it's not what we're saying. So if you got that out of that podcast, you're not listening to anything that we're saying, but I don't think you could anymore because I've said it like 3 times. So anything you want to add to that?
Nope.
I think covered everything and more. So thanks for your attention for this today. If you liked this podcast, go hit that review. If you've already given us a review, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Maybe send this to somebody who would benefit from this information. I think this is pretty solid information there. So obviously I'm going to think that, though. I'm a little biased. But once again, thanks, Ryan, for coming on and helping me meander through my own thoughts and giving your advice. It's always helpful to have a second person here. Yeah,
absolutely. And if you have gone to multiple providers and you haven't experienced an assessment like this, don't give up, especially if you're searching for answers. There's somebody out there to help you. And if you can't find that person, reach out to us. We're happy to connect you with somebody or help you out to the best of our ability.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot out there, and sometimes it feels hopeless, but I promise you it's not. And I say that as somebody who was really struggling to find answers for a very long time. So I think that's a great way to end the podcast. So thanks for listening. I just hit the mic, so I'm sorry. We'll see if we can edit that out. What are you trying to say?
No, it has to be time to end this. You're hitting the mic. We're done.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. We'll see you on the next podcast.